All right. Welcome to the very first episode of the Helpful Huddle Podcast. I am your host, Luke, and I am sitting here with Sean Irwin, pro bodybuilder coach. Say hi to the people, Sean.
How's it going, everybody? What's going on, Luke? Thanks for having me, man. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. Now, just a short introduction on how I met Sean. I was actually very fortunate enough to have been in a position within a company called Lifetime that I was in a managerial position and I had this jacked guy walk in and get an interview. And it just happened to be Mr. Sean Irwin. And I was very fortunate enough to hire him and get to know him. And I think actually when I first met you, you were just coming off of contest prep. So, because I just remember you constantly shoveling food.
Yeah, I was kind of going into an off-season phase, and I was just trying to grow. It was just force feeding all day long. So
I like it. I like it. And then obviously I did personally see something in you that knew that you were more than just a trainer at a commercial gym. So I remember specifically sitting at home around Christmas when you shot me a text saying thank you for the opportunity, but that you were going to go your separate ways. And I was upset initially, but then I was like, man, I know he's going to do awesome things. So I'm really excited to have this interview and talk to you about all things fitness on your side.
yeah, I remember that text message that you sent me actually, and yeah, that's pretty much along the lines of what you said, and I could tell that you meant it as well. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, man, absolutely. I support you 100%. So, but I want to get started now, just diving right into our interview. I want to start out broad and find out like how did you even get into the fitness industry at all?
So I have the pretty typical story of just being that skinny kid in school that was kind of getting picked on, and I decided that I wanted to gain some weight and get stronger and be able to defend myself, I guess you could say. So, I started getting familiar with the weight room, and I acquired my first job at a smoothie shop where we were selling supplements and stuff, and it was right next to an LA Fitness, and I pretty much lived there, training and just making smoothies. So. And that was in high school. So I've been around fitness and bodybuilding and nutrition for a very long time. It's pretty much all my life has revolved around. It's where all my interest is in terms of learning things. I never got sick of it. I just always wanted to learn more and more. And after high school, I had some other jobs. I was in the hospitality industry. I was in a couple other things. I was very fortunate to have those jobs because I acquired a lot of skills that are very helpful for my coaching career now. But my passion was always in fitness and bodybuilding. So I decided to pretty much drop everything and go all in on personal training, coaching. I got my start as a personal trainer around the same time that I was doing my first bodybuilding competition as well. And from there, I just kind of worked my way up to where I am now. I always said from the start of my career that I wanted to be a top level bodybuilding coach. So every move that I've made since then has been geared towards that end game.
Absolutely. And man, you are well on your way. And we'll dive a little bit more into that later. But it's funny hearing kind of that is kind of a typical story that you hear. I was a little bit different in the side of I got into it with or due to athletics, and I actually consistently got injured, and the only thing that I had was the gym. So I kind of fell in love with the gym and was at a local bodybuilding style gym. So that's what I was around and saw. So I totally resonate with that, even to the point that my first job was also at a smoothie place. It was at Smoothie King. I can still make those some of those smoothies from heart. I'm sure you can too if you really wanted to.
Oh yeah, it's an art form for sure.
Absolutely. But I want to know also digging a little deeper into kind of how you got on the side of bodybuilding? What kind of drew you to that?
When it came to training and nutrition, I was always kind of focused more on the aesthetics kind of side of things and the cosmetic side of things. I always kind of like found that I had an eye, like I just kind of was always looking at people's physiques and analyzing physiques and kind of like picking them apart. Even when I was really young, it just kind of naturally did that. So that was kind of always where the focus was at. And then all the training and nutrition, it was just piecing together how we developed a physique essentially. And, those other pieces kind of play into it, like strength and stuff like that. But it was all as a result of focusing on that aesthetic cosmetic piece. And then, I was growing up in high school and when I was working at Smoothie Factory and stuff, I had a pretty big focus on just watching like the open level bodybuilders, like Jay Cutler and Phil Heath during the time and all of them. So that was where a lot of my attention was.
I like it. Yeah, and I totally get that because I remember our gym back in Alabama was ran by a former Mr. Alabama. He was the owner, and we had, I mean, rest in peace. We had Dallas McCarver come through and Flex Lewis, and there were big guys that were constantly coming through the gym, even to the point when I first met Flex Lewis, I actually just thought he was another big guy. I didn't think anything of it, and even having a conversation with him. And then, funny enough, he left, and I actually ended up working at that gym. That was my first job in fitness training, and we actually had a poster of him, and I was like, "Oh, that's Mr. 212 bodybuilding." So I always think that's funny that I just thought it was just another big guy.
Yeah, man, he's fantastic. He's the GOAT for sure.
For sure. He's such a nice guy. Um, but but I guess like you mentioned it earlier that you had kind of from an early start the ultimate goal of coaching high-end bodybuilding. Why coaching the high end at the highest level? What I guess what drew you to coaching as opposed to even competing?
So I realized pretty early on that, like I said, I started my career as a personal trainer and as a bodybuilder
Right.
kind of at the same time. And I realized pretty early on that a lot of the information that I was learning was geared towards, or just to do my own bodybuilding. I was so much more in tune with like the information and the knowledge and like learning things rather than just executing as an athlete. And then very quickly learned that I enjoyed just coaching and training people much more than I enjoyed bodybuilding myself necessarily. I definitely enjoy bodybuilding. It's definitely a piece. It's very synergistic with what I do as a coach and leading by example and all these different things and having hands-on experience in the trenches and being able to relate to athletes in terms of like when you're deep into a dieting phase and you're ready to like eat your arm off kind of thing. So um, I just kind of realized pretty early on that coaching was really where my talent was and less of bodybuilding myself as an athlete. And now I kind of live vicariously through my athletes. So I kind of get, the best of both worlds when I'm at a show and um, I've been preparing an athlete for a contest and the same adrenaline rush and all the stress and pressure of it, I really thrive there. So I kind of get the best of both worlds in terms of coaching. And then I still get that kind of like pressure and adrenaline rush from being at a show and watching them compete. So it's all really fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I love hearing is kind of the like-mindedness that you and I have of like at our core, we want to help people even more so than we want to help ourselves. And I think that's such a big piece. And I mean, that's what the whole mission of this podcast I'm doing even is around is helping people help people. And I put it on my kind of intro message, but I kind of live by, or I don't kind of, I try to live by the motto of if you're not making someone else's life better, then you're wasting your time. So it's awesome to hear that there's people in a sport like bodybuilding that truly care about others and the success of others and put others ahead of themselves. Because as we know, bodybuilding is a selfish sport, especially from the athlete side of things. I mean, you're training multiple hours a day at times to make yourself look a certain way. So having that humble experience or people around those humble people around you is key. And so I'm really glad to hear that that's kind of where that's not kind of that is who you are at your core.
Yeah, I mean, there's a big piece of that that's like completely disconnected from bodybuilding. That's just, living a purpose of serving others. And there's a saying I always like everything I do is pretty much geared towards providing something for other people and trying to make the world a better place and impacting other people's lives and stuff. And there's a saying I really like, and it's that you can't pour from an empty cup, right? So even when I'm taking care of myself and doing things for myself, it's all in preparation to be able to better serve others. So it's very important stuff, to keep your mind in the right place when it comes to that stuff, and trying to, just provide for your community and just trying to make the world a better place than you found it.
I love it. And I was sorry, I was writing that down. I love that quote.
That's it.
So, yeah, I absolutely love that. And I want, and just kind of to keep the juices flowing, I want to talk about you making that decision to go independent and start your own business. We didn't introduce it at the beginning, but you are the founder CEO of SAGA Coaching. Um, One, I want to know where SAGA came from, but even before that, I want to kind of know your mindset of, hey, I am now in a position where I'm comfortable and confident enough in myself to start my own business and be an entrepreneur and a self-owned business.
Yeah, so bodybuilding and fitness have always been my number one passion, but next to that has always been business, and I've spent a lot of time educating myself in that realm as well, in terms of understanding businesses and how they operate. And I've always gravitated towards, just even the story of like Steve Jobs, or all these large companies and stuff like that. It's always been very interesting to me and things that I've studied. So that kind of fell in line with just running my own business in this sense, in terms of something that I'm very passionate about. Um, and with that being said, I've always paid very close attention to how companies brand themselves, and all the strategies that they use in terms of making an impactful brand and something that's memorable. So when I set out to create Saga, I kind of knew that I wanted to create something that was just kind of impactful, memorable, and really simple and minimalistic at the same time. Kind of like how Apple just has the Apple. It's just, or Google is just one word. You just know what Google is. You know what I mean? So I was looking for a word that just had a lot of impact behind it and a lot of meaning, and something that would make good for a good logo. And I was just searching around. I'm very patient when it comes to these things, which is very important. Taking your time instead of just kind of rushing into something and throwing something together, and like putting a little bit more thought into it and having some level of creative process behind it. And I just kind of stumbled across the word saga, and I just really liked how simple it was and minimal. Has Scandinavian origin, so it's kind of like a Norse word. It kind of means like this, like a story of greatness and like the trials and tribulations that somebody goes through to accomplish some level of greatness, kind of like a heroic story. So I thought that that was, meant a lot, and kind of had a lot of parallels in terms of bodybuilding, or even just a lifestyle client, just trying to make it through their life, and live the highest quality life that they can. So, I thought that it would make for a good logo as well. And I just ran with it, and people seem to love it. So it worked out well.
Absolutely. And we'll make sure we get the specifics and I'll put it in the description below. But you have an apparel line and the shirts are so comfortable and they look good too, don't get me wrong, but they are so comfortable just to wear. You don't even they're not necessarily workout shirts. Like you can obviously work out in them, but dude, I wear them around town and I'm just so comfortable in them. So highly recommend those.
Yeah, that's just kind of how I do things. I'm very attentive to detail. I'm very particular about things. So even our shirts and stuff, I really want like top of the line, and want things to fit a certain way and want a specific design. And I'll like lose money on that stuff just because like I just want my brand to be top tier, But it's all worth it, and the ROI seems to be happening. So
Absolutely. Something that you touched on while you were talking about it was like kind of focusing on the business side of this and like marketing and things of that nature. And I know from my experience being in the managerial side of commercial gyms that, and I mean even myself, I've I've seen a lot of people that want to start their own business and go and be independent and do what you're doing. It may not be bodybuilding itself, but do what you're doing and making their living off of being their own boss in fitness. What advice do you have someone that's looking into doing that and are hesitant to make that leap?
I would say make sure that it's genuinely what you want to do. Um, Running a business is not easy. I work 7 days a week, whether it's 16 hours. I'm every single day I'm doing something regarding my business. There's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of stress. There's fluctuations in income. There's a lot of things that you have to take into account when going into something like this. I think a lot of people see the glitz and glam of entrepreneurship on social media when in reality majority of it is just um, small business owners under a lot of pressure and a lot of stress on a day-to-day basis, you know what I mean, with a lot of pressure and people to deal with and fires to put out and all kinds of stuff like that. So I would say first and foremost, make sure it's really what you want to do and you're not just like seeing these dudes driving Ferraris around on Instagram and stuff and aspiring to live that lifestyle because you never know how they necessarily got there. So make sure it's what you want to do, and then and marketing advice that I've always kind of given or always kind of done myself, and this is just kind of like my personal thing, is really focus on being just good at what you do first and providing a quality product or service before you worry about anything else. A lot of it will just fall into place after that in terms of marketing and stuff. I don't have a huge social media platform. I've always just very much focused on being very good at what I do, providing the highest level of service I can, focusing on things like customer service, communication, always improving things, fine tuning your process, all these different things, um, instead of focusing on just like posting pictures and reels on Instagram all the time. And although a large social media platform can convert sales, obviously, I wouldn't recommend that being your priority, your top level priority. Obviously, it's very important. But I would say first and foremost, focus on being passionate about what you do and being very good at what you do. And then another piece of advice that I can give. I mean, I haven't been in this game for that long. I would love to have this conversation again in like 5 or 10 years. I'm probably gonna have a lot more to give in terms of advice for
Absolutely.
running businesses. But I've had to learn over the past couple of years to better delegate and focus. We call it like delegate and elevate. So focusing on leading and championing the people that you're delegating to, helping them grow as well. So I've had to kind of let go of the vine, I guess you could say. When you start your business, it's kind of your baby, and you're like trying to handle all the things at once. And I've kind of had to learn to let go of a lot of it so I can focus on actually coaching and not just working
Mhm.
on my business all the time. So
Yeah, absolutely. And I've heard that too about delegation, and it's a hard thing to do, especially when you're dealing with your baby, like you said. So, but I want to keep on rolling, and I kind of want to know on the other side of things. You started talking about how dedicated to your craft you are, and I mean, I saw that firsthand when when we were working together and how attention to detail and you were constantly reading or learning something new or trying to fine tune your process or craft. Um, but I want to know kind of what who do you view or have as like mentors in your corner, and like where do you go to learn or seek out to learn new things?
so I've had a lot of various different mentors and resources in terms of education over the years. I'm sitting at like 6 or 7 certifications at this point. I'm not quite sure, but that was a great foundation for me at the beginning. Was those I see a lot of people like despise like NASM and stuff like that, but so much of those like fundamental, even just like verbiage and stuff that I picked up from those basic certifications were huge, you know. Even just like things like sagittal, frontal, plane kind of stuff, you know, like that. Those kinds of terminologies are very fundamental and important to know. That way you can
Mhm.
move on to the bigger and better things. But a big certification that I got was RTS, which is Resistance Training Specialist. The mastermind behind that is Tom Purvis, and he's an absolute genius. He's had his hand in a lot of different. He's had his hand in NASM before. He's had his hand in different equipment manufacturers and all kinds of stuff in terms of understanding. A big thing with him is understanding strength and resistance profiles, and like machine analysis, being able to look at a piece of equipment and kind of analyze, you know, axis points and moment arms and all these different things. And once you take that kind of course, it's kind of like a red pill almost, where your eyes just open up and you just everything you see in the gym is just like it's never the same again in terms of how you see equipment and how you see biomechanics and all these different things. So that was probably the biggest one in terms of exercise for sure. And then in terms of bodybuilding, one of my first I would consider mentors was Hunter Labrada. He's more of an athlete, obviously, but you know, when I got my start, he was the first person I reached out to in terms of bodybuilding. He helped me prepare for my first show. We were always very like-minded in terms of being attentive to detail, and always wanting to learn new things in terms of hypertrophy and nutrition, science, all that kind of stuff. So he was like a big kind of role model at the beginning, and now it's cool because we still hang out all the time. And I'm a Labrada athlete, so I get to train out there at the gym and stuff, and we bounce ideas off each other and all that. So it's pretty cool. And I currently work with a gentleman by the name of Austin Stout. He's kind of my primary mentor. He deals a lot with like the functional health side of things, and performance enhancing drugs, all that kind of stuff. So, you know, he's kind of my primary go-to guy. And even if I'm like running into an issue or like trying to troubleshoot like an athlete or something like that, I'll kind of like run it past him and kind of get a second opinion. So he's awesome to work with, and I've been with him for almost 2 years now. So he also coached me as well for a while, and still currently coaches me and does my nutrition and training and stuff. So he's fantastic. Other than that, man, it's just been from all over the place. I like Mike Israetel a lot. I pay a lot of attention to Jordan Peters, Joe Jeffrey. There's a lot of great guys out there. They're all fantastic. So, you know, I just try to
Absolutely.
find people that are providing a lot of value and substance on Instagram and not sensationalized content, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think being able to have those voices that are specifically like-minded, and because that's kind of where it's hard to be a Swiss Army knife at things. So when you really want to get good at something, you need to focus on something. So having those like-minded people and people that you look up to, and you took the step of reaching out to like Hunter Labrada, and just putting yourself out there and being willing to learn. If it's someone that's truly like-minded, they are going to be very receptive of that. And I think you've experienced that in your career so far.
Absolutely, man. I've always tried to surround myself with people that were better than me or knew more than me or whatever it may be, and try to learn from them and level up with them. You know, so it's very important who you surround yourself with.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I've always tried to kind of be also go by the phrase of I never want to be the smartest person in the room.
Absolutely,
And yeah, so I think that's a way that you always continue to grow and always willing to learn. And this kind of just rolls kind of straight into my next question of your own coaching style. Not not just specifically the style, but I want to know kind of like what do you feel that you bring to the table that you're not going to get from your run of the mill coach, or kind of what you'd probably call status quo average.
so even just the fact that I'm a bodybuilding coach and a high level bodybuilding coach kind of like puts me in the niche to some extent. A lot of people think the
Mhm.
fitness industry is very saturated, which it is to some extent. But you know, when you find your passion and your niche, you know, you're going to kind of set yourself apart pretty easily. At the end of the day, there's not. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, there's not that many top level bodybuilding coaches in
Right.
comparison to the rest of everybody and their mother that's a coach. So Find your niche and kind of roll with that. Um, you know, Other than that, I'm very attentive to detail. I have a very big focus on the training side of things. I get complaints a lot with athletes coming to me. I don't like to step on other toes or say negative things about other coaches, but a lot of bodybuilding coaches don't necessarily prioritize the training piece. It does take a lot of effort to review training footage, and it takes a level of knowledge outside of just getting somebody lean to provide feedback in terms of training
Mhm.
performance. And it takes a lot of effort to really dial in somebody's training and hit the nail on the head and when they go into sessions and stuff. So that's a big focus I have. The attention to detail, the organization piece, everything's extremely organized. That's usually the feedback I get out the gate from an athlete is they're like, wow, everything's so detailed and organized. This isn't something I've ever experienced with a coach before. Um, and that's just kind of like naturally how I operate to begin with. I'm a very organized, clean person. So a lot
Mhm.
of that translates into my services. Like I said, I was also in hospitality. So a lot of like my communication and verbiage and professionalism kind of stems from that. So I'm able to provide that kind of customer service that people aren't necessarily used to in this industry. And other than that, I also have a big focus on like the functional health side of things, making sure that we're mitigating any negative health impacts that bodybuilding may have on somebody, making sure that we're being very responsible in terms of performance enhancing drugs and all those different aspects of the sport. So.
For sure, and that actually is a perfect lead into my next question of I I wanna know how you combine the aspects of such an aesthetic role in coaching bodybuilders, but also focusing on the overall health of your clients. How do you combine that?
So I usually, bodybuilding is a very extreme endeavor. You're
Mhm.
taking the body to a place that it does not want to go, and depending on the person, you're most likely going to experience some level of negative adaptation through the process. Um, your body's just not going to like it necessarily. You're doing a lot of things that, and chronically being in a state where the body's just not happy. So with that being said, we acknowledge that, we accept it, and then we kind of try to mitigate that through the process while still taking the body to that extreme. So I usually say, we're doing something that's extreme, but we want to find balance within the nuances of what's going on here. So
Mhm.
whether that's the nutrition, the training, the performance enhancing drug side of things, the supplementation, all these different pieces. And not doing things that are unnecessary, not taking risks that are unnecessary with diminishing returns. It's a lot of that kind of stuff and those nuances. And that's where hiring a great coach really comes into play because it takes a lot of that thinking out of the equation. And that's a
Mhm.
perspective that I have from working with athletes and doing this thing myself too. So, um, that's where we can really get things dialed in. And then obviously recovery after the fact as well. So, we're taking the body to an extreme and then focusing on the recovery piece after, and focusing on reverse dieting, pulling labs, making sure that we're addressing where those issues have arisen, and making sure that we're also healthy going into the contest prep to begin with. A lot of times, athletes will come to me after years of competing and they're kind of a mess. And usually, like, you don't want to dig a deeper hole by going back into
Mhm.
a contest prep. You want to kind of, dig yourself out of the hole, find level ground again before we start digging back down. So, usually, the people that suffer from a lot of negative health effects from bodybuilding are people that are already in a hole and they just keep digging and digging and before you know it, they're blaming the coach and blaming the world and blaming bodybuilding and
Yep.
blaming everybody but themselves. So
For sure, yeah, and you see that all the time in this industry, and I wanna know because you were touching on it a little bit, but when an athlete like that comes to you and they're in a bad place, but one, I wanna know how you have that conversation to, because 'cause they're probably coming to you and about to wanna at least start a prep or do something, how you manage that expectation with them and get them to focus on their health. How do you have that conversation?
I'm glad you used the word expectation because that's exactly what I was about to say is managing those expectations is probably the most important piece of that. You don't want to get overly excited when you're intaking an athlete and, hype them up, be like, oh, I'm so excited to put you on stage, and say all these things that are going to put somebody in a frame of mind where it's like, hey, I'm probably going to be able to compete this year or whatever. I try to set realistic expectations out the gate and kind of, manage those things. And that kind of like will help determine if the athlete is suited for a coach like myself as well. Because if there's somebody that's really gun ho and wants to keep digging themselves into a hole, then sometimes you can't stop that train and you just got to let it happen. But I'm not going to be the guy to do that. So I try to set those expectations out the gate. It's like, look, like we really need to get the stars aligned before we go into a contest prep. This could take a very long period of time, depending on how we progress, how you adhere to the program. If we're pulling labs on time, and just all these different pieces, and then there's a lot of individuality to that too. Different people
Yeah.
are more resilient than others to these extremes. So, you try to set these realistic expectations. I don't really set dates out the gate. I'm not like, we're going to be able to do this by this date and this and this. Like, we got to kind of play things by ear. It's going to take a couple of weeks just for us to get up to speed in terms of like executing the program. And I don't even know if you're going to be adherent to that to begin with, like the fundamentals,
Right.
So let alone running a supplement protocol based on like any negative adaptations that you've accumulated over the years from competing and stuff. So a lot of it's dependent on a lot of different variables. So setting those expectations out the gate, try not to get them too hyped up about competing. And a big problem with competitors that, I try to coach a lot of my athletes to like reframe their mindset about is like not needing that date and not like having that carrot that's dangled in front of them all the time, and kind of just like, look, if you don't enjoy this lifestyle and you're not able to sustain it for long periods of time without having that date in mind at that end, like that, that specific carrot that's dangled in front of you all the time, then maybe this isn't the right sport for you necessarily. Like sometimes we have to be able to do the boring stuff for very long periods of time and adhere to it and just have it be a part of the lifestyle. Before we're going to be able to set those dates and have all the exciting things that come along. It's just like anything in life, right? Like you're trying to save up to buy a house or something like that. You're going to have to sit there and budget yourself and do a lot of boring, like just saving for long periods of time before you get to go purchase that house, and then it's big and exciting, right? And a lot of times you don't know exactly when you're going to be able to accumulate enough money to put that down payment down. It's just like, there's a lot of parallels, so it's just like anything in life, we have to be patient, and I try to instill that in my athletes as well.
Yeah, I completely agree. And something that I'm thinking about as you're talking about this, especially when you're getting a new athlete, is getting those data points and having as many data points as you can possibly have so that you can make the next correct adjustment and know and kind of really refine timing. And when you have a good coach like yourself, or a great coach, even when you have enough data points, it makes life a lot easier on the back end, not just with contest prep, but the post down the road and getting your body back functioning correctly and all of those things post show, post everything.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very important. Like I said, bodybuilding can create a lot of negative adaptations, whether that's like down regulations and like sex hormones, adrenal function, digestive function. There's a lot of different pieces to that, and that's where a lot of that like functional health side of things comes in. Because bodybuilders kind of do it to themselves, and then we kind of have to like patch that up before doing it again, essentially. So being able to kind of like diagnose those things and support where it's needed. A lot of the times it's just like taking enough time off, man, and like pulling back on expenditure, pulling back on stress load. A lot of it's simply just from the stress load alone. Like going into a diet is stress on the body, doing the cardio is stress on the body, the training for long periods of time is stress on the body. So a lot of it's just stress accumulation, and your body just pretty much like shutting down on you to some extent. You know what I mean? And sometimes it's just a matter of pulling back on that expenditure, accepting the fact that we're going to have to gain some body fat and spend enough time in a surplus where your body can kind of recover from those things. A lot of people think it's like some sort of magic pill or there's a magic supplement protocol out there or whatever it may be, but sometimes you just need to chill.
Absolutely. And that's such a neglected piece of the pie, if you will, is the stress management and really managing that overall load that you put on the body day in and day out. And it's amazing what just a little like have going from a 5 day to a 4 day training program, cutting cardio back, those type of things, how much it truly helps the body and helps the physique and everything just overall. But something I wanted to lead into, and we were having this conversation off camera before, but I want to know kind of the labs and the tests that you utilize in your programming and everything. Like, what are those different types of labs that you utilize, and what do they do, and how do they help you?
So blood work is usually our primary tool here. Running simple panels like CBC, CMP, and then sex hormones, thyroid is extremely important when it comes to bodybuilding. And then some of the deeper level stuff in terms of sex hormones as well. We look at things like even CRP in terms of like inflammation markers and vitamin D, all these different pieces that can contribute to the way that you look and the way that um, we're able to execute a successful contest prep. So blood work's kind of like the first go-to thing. And usually like a lot of the down regulations that I spoke of are usually along the lines of sex hormones and thyroid hormones. Um, and then beyond that, I run GI maps a lot. So that's a stool sample that kind of gives us a bacterial profile of the gut. Um,
Mhm.
Oftentimes, what we'll run into with competitors is some level of dysbiosis in the gut, bacterial overgrowths, all kinds of stuff like that. Those are things that need to be addressed so that we can execute a contest prep to the best of our extent. And a lot of those things will just impact quality of life a lot. So I'll have competitors coming to me all the time with bloating issues, claiming that they have like IBS, a lot of you know, gas and all kinds of different issues in their gut. They're just uncomfortable all the time. And usually we pull a GI map and it's, a dumpster fire. And,
Yeah.
we want to fix that root issue rather than just slapping band-aids on stuff because people are way too quick to, be popping antacids and all these different things that can ultimately make the situation worse, to be honest. Or
Mhm.
they think that like apple cider vinegar is going to be like some sort of magic thing or like, I don't know, it's like let's get to the root cause, address it,
Absolutely.
get the fire put out, and then try to mitigate that from coming back going forward. You know what I mean? So GI maps are a big one. I would say nearly like 75% of female athletes come back with some sort of bacterial overgrowth, and sometimes that can be like a lifestyle change too. If we just dial in the nutrition, focus on more whole foods, less processed stuff, low FODMAP diet. A lot of different things can like kind of assist with a SIBO situation. But oftentimes if we're trying to like really address something or it's a more severe, like if it's really a dumpster fire, we'll run a protocol and kind of like do like a kill off phase and then kind of repopulate the gut with a probiotic and stuff. So it gives us a lot of insight and like I said, kind of gets us to the root. We can sit here and like play guessing games all day long of like why you have gas or like is it this specific food? We're like pulling foods in and out and blah blah blah. But it's probably
Mhm.
some sort of underlying issue. Usually, if somebody comes to me with like a lot of food sensitivities, that's usually the problem. Like we just fix the gut, and all of a sudden we're fine with a lot of foods. So you're not just like magically sensitive to like a whole laundry list of foods. You know what I mean? Like usually, if somebody comes to me like that, I'm like, there's probably something deeper going on there. And then another test that we do is a Dutch test. That one's urinalysis, so it's nice that people can kind of do it in the comfort of their own home. They don't have to go deal with needles in a lab anywhere.
Mhm.
That can kind of give us a deeper dive into things like sex hormones and adrenal function and how things are like converting and methylating and stuff. It's very interesting and a lot more of a deeper dive, I guess you could say, into that. I do find that like with Dutch tests, there's certain things that can be a little bit inaccurate, I guess you could say. A lot of times you'll see like testosterone tanked on there, and on the blood work, the testosterone isn't quite as bad. I mean, you'll still see a reflection there, but it's not. So usually like blood work's the primary go-to in terms of looking at sex hormones and adrenal
Mhm.
function and looking at things like cortisol and stuff like that. So, um, but yeah, those are kind of like the big three that I utilize.
And I love that, and I know so many coaches, or I've heard of so many coaches that neglect that inner workings of the body and neglect the overall health of the client just in pursuit of results. So it's awesome that, and I mean, I personally didn't know about the Dutch test, and I'm very new to kind of the GI mapping and getting the gut bacteria fixed. I had to do that a couple of years ago a after a very stressful time in my life that, um, it kinda just threw me for a loop, and my gut was all messed up, and doing the elimination, the reintroduction of everything, so it's very, very important. I can speak firsthand that it helps a ton, but you do need to have someone that knows what they're doing to help you coach you through that, 'cause it's also very easy to mess up.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I really work hard to be able to have these resources available for my athletes and trying to make sure that they're affordable and stuff, and
Mhm.
um, make sure that they're in good hands in regards to all this kind of testing and analyzing the tests.
Dude, that's amazing. Um, and it kinda leads into this next question. So, when you take an athlete and let's say that you've quote unquote fixed them, you've done the labs and they're in good physical health, and now it's time to go into a prep. How I guess I kind of want to know like your blueprint of how you approach someone's prep and then ultimately that peak week and then show day,
So it's going to be very person dependent. This can
of course.
vary very broadly in terms of the athlete, the division, whether they're enhanced or natural, all kinds of different things kind of play into this. There's a lot of genetic variability in the sport, obviously. Um, a lot of people will kind of like either underplay the genetic piece or overplay it, but I think that we kind of need to have a balanced discussion in terms of genetics. This
Hmm.
is actually something I was hoping we could kind of touch on today,
Yeah.
because you usually hear people say that like genetics don't matter or genetics are everything, and I truly believe it's somewhere kind of in between. There are people, if you could have the best genetics on the planet, but if you don't have the mindset and you're not able to overcome adversity through a diet, like you're not even gonna be able to make it to stage. And then somebody with genetics that aren't quite as good as yours are going to show up that day and win, right? So there's somewhere in between, right? It's kind of a balanced discussion, but there's a lot of variability when it comes to that kind of stuff. So we kind of analyze the athlete, see where they're at, see the progress we made through an off season, um, where their body fat levels. If I've done a contest prep with them in the past, how fast do I think that I can get them lean? All these different pieces, and usually I kind of will create kind of map out. I have a section on my spreadsheets that I utilize. It's kind of like phase periodization kind of stuff, where I'll kind of
Mhm.
map out. I'll like basically reverse engineer. So say we have a show date, I'll kind of reverse engineer up from there in terms of training, nutrition, performance enhancing drugs, everything. Kind of give us like a general idea of how the prep's going to be executed. Um, I'll like kind of schedule in things like diet breaks or refeeds, pull blood work in certain at certain milestones, all these different things. This is just a nice way to stay organized myself and have reference going into it. And then also the athlete kind of sees it and they have a better idea of what's going on. And it sets better expectations with the athlete, like we talked about earlier. That way they're not asking me questions all the time, like what are we doing next? Like what's going on now? Like what are you, or they'll just like send me body weights and like, what are you looking at with my body weights? Like, I want to know,
Right.
it's like kind of gives them an idea of what we're doing and all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of a communication piece too. Um, but it really depends on the athlete. Like I said, I often use like a cyclical dieting kind of approach, whether that's carb cycling, refeeding. And a lot of that kind of like you'll get a feel for that going into a contest prep. It's like, okay, we're refeeding every X day, and it's kind of setting back their progress. So it's like spread that out a little bit, or you just kind of play around with these variables through the contest prep, and that's kind of where the coaching comes into play. And being able to make rational, objective calls when you're taking in biofeedback and you're looking at a check-in and looking at pictures and looking at the data that's being collected, being able to sit there and make a rational, objective decision in terms of where we need to go to reach that end goal. Um, then obviously, like I try to get my athletes ready relatively early. The idea is to be stage lean, a couple weeks out. The idea behind that is not only to be able to test peak, but also just to be able to pull stress off in general. Oftentimes, just getting to that point and then pulling some of the stress off or backing off on cardio a little bit, or giving some influxes of food, all that kind of stuff is going to pull a lot of stress off the athlete. A lot of times you'll find that their body fat starts falling off them even faster. Their look just starts to improve, all these different pieces. So that's very valuable. And then obviously test peaking as well. So um, that's like things that we collect through the entirety of the prep release, like with the refeeds and stuff. The influxes of food, kind of seeing how the body responds to that. What does weight do in relation to that influx of food? How does our look change? Our lines blurred? All these different pieces that you can collect and data that you can collect to make a peak a lot more predictable. I like to go for peak week kind of knowing already what we're going to do. That takes a lot of pressure off of me and the athlete. It takes a lot of stress off of everybody. We kind of know how the body's going to respond. Going into peak week, we're going to be pulling out a lot of energy expenditure. So those things are kind of taken into account. We're backing off on cardio, backing off on training and stuff. So, it can't be 100% predictable, but we try to do the best we can to create a predictable environment. We know how the body is going to respond to certain foods. We know how it's going to respond to certain amounts of foods, etc. So all those things are very helpful. And then hopefully in a perfect world, leading to the perfect peak, right? So, that kind of brings us to that point. So, and then obviously outside of all those things that I take care of as a coach, a lot of the pieces is, I guess this is still me taking care of it as a coach, but this is where I delegate a little bit, right? Is making sure that posing's on point, presentation, making sure that the athlete's not cutting corners in terms of a lot of different things, making sure that an athlete's prepared and has everything that they need to have backstage, all that kind of stuff. So all very important things.
Yeah, for sure. And a lot of what you were touching on is something that I want to bring up and make sure we highlight. And that's kind of so many people try to do 12-week hard cut. For whatever reason, that 12-week is kind of the gold standard, quote unquote. And how important it is to give more time to test peak, especially if it's your first show or one of your first shows. Um, I whenever I've tried to peak people, I've tried to minimum 2 weeks out, they're show ready, and we know exactly how, like, that test peak went so we can make any adjustments or to become imperfect. You just don't know. Um, but how, I guess, in a broad scale, because it's gonna be a very dependent answer because you don't know, you can't generalize exactly where an athlete's starting out point is. But how long do you want to have to properly prep somebody for a show?
So this is going to be a little bit different from what a lot of coaches usually do, but I like to start a little bit further out. This is kind of one of those like balance within the extremes sort of things that I touched on, where
Mhm.
you don't want to have somebody in a dieting phase for a very long chronic period of time where we end up accumulating even more negative adaptations. Um, but also like, you don't want to diet somebody extremely aggressively within a short window because then that's going to do the exact same thing, right? So we like want to find some happy medium there. We don't
Right.
want somebody to be in a deficit for 40 weeks, but we also don't want to just like crash diet somebody, right? So there has to be a balanced discussion there. I would say, generally speaking, on average, males about 20 weeks out, and then females 25 to 30 weeks of dieting, and that's including diet breaks inside of those.
Right.
So like we'll go like an entire week at like maintenance kind of thing just to pull stress off and um, back off on maybe performance enhancing drugs or whatever we're doing, just to
Mhm.
release stress and then kind of like let the body come back to life a little bit and then go back into the dieting phase. So that's kind of how I prefer to do things ideally, but it can vary.
Of course. Yeah, there's always gonna be variability within it. It's not an exact science. There's no specific formula. And that's something that I take the same approach. I want as much time as possible. And something that I really want to highlight that you were talking about is that when you say 20 to 25 weeks, you're not saying caloric deficit for half the year. You're talking about refeeds, bringing yourself back to maintenance, diet breaks, all of those things. And all of those things are pieces that you have in your back pocket as a coach to really bring in the best and best and to a point the healthiest that you possibly can when you're dealing with such low body fats. But that's something that is very important, is that giving yourself that time and doing it correctly. And we've had this conversation before, but I want to hear, how is your coaching style, as in nutrition, different, like show prep versus not, specifically from like the flexible dieting versus meal prep side of things, or not meal prep, but meal plan?
Yeah, and we've kind of discussed this before in terms of like the individuality piece, in terms of like what kind of dieting is going to work best for somebody, right?
Right.
There's some people where it's like you try flexible dieting out and they just like they're like, just tell me what to do, you know what I mean? And then there's the
Mhm.
people that you tell them what to do and they're like, no, I can't handle this amount of structure, and like I need freedom, and I have this event going on and this and that, you know. So I try to find a balance, you know. Even in the off season, you know, I'll do mine's almost like a lot of times I'll do like a fusion of like a meal plan and flexible dieting, right? So all of my plans that I send out, even if it's somebody's just on a meal plan, all the macros and calorie totals are laid out, the fibers laid out, everything's laid out for each meal, each piece of food that they're eating. It's all on there. So like if they're in a dire situation, like they're traveling or something like that, and you need to swap out a meal and find something that's comparable in terms of macros, you can do that. And I would consider that still 100% adherence to the program. So in the off season, you know, I'm a lot more lenient in terms of that kind of stuff. Now, when we go into a contest prep, um, there are certain variables that we want to have more control over, right? We want to,
Mhm.
like I said, with the peaking, we want to have a more predictable environment. And, you know, that doesn't necessarily mean that there's good or bad foods, right? There's none of that kind of discussion. It's kind of just like really dialing in those tiny little nuances and how can we squeeze that extra like 0.5% out of the physique, you know what I mean? And dialing in things like nutrition, like I said, making sure that we have a predictable environment in terms of foods that agree with the athlete. We're eliminating pretty much all processed foods at that point in terms of, you know, because all those things can be adding to risk in terms of somebody waking up really bloated on show day or whatever it may be, right? And
Mhm.
it's not that those foods are inherently bad or good, but you know, we just want to minimize any risk in terms of how somebody's going to end up looking. And then there's a lot of other pieces to that that go like even micronutrient intake and fiber intake and consistency of these different things during contest prep become a lot more paramount versus, you know, in the off season. And in the off season too, or, you know, an improvement phase or whatever you want to call it, right? We also are in kind of a recovery phase too. So you do want a little bit more nutrient variance too. Like you want to have, like, you know, you don't want to be eating the same vegetable every single day. You want to be able to like have some diversity in nutrients in terms of berries, fruits, vegetables, all these different things. That way, you're getting a lot of those micronutrients and focusing on things like fiber and stuff like that too. So in the contest prep, some of that goes out the window just for the sake of being able to control for those variables. But you know, it really depends on the person. I have athletes that are flexible dieters. I have athletes that are on meal plans year round. I have athletes that like refuse to take cheat meals. I have athletes that take an extra cheat meal every week, even though I'm telling them not to. It's like it really depends on the person, man. There's so many. That was the biggest thing I learned with coaching is just the amount of different personality types and people that I deal with is just crazy. There's so much variability, so it's fun but stressful at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. And something that I think the key word with this is, then you've used it multiple times, is adherence. That it's not going to succeed if they're not able to adhere to it. So, as a coach and as a person, being honest with yourself of what you can do for a long period of time will make you the most successful. And
Absolutely.
I mean, on a personal level, like when I'm in a different place in my life where I just intuitively eat, and that works for me at this point. But when I was in New York as a model, or if I was when I was competing, I'm a big proponent of the flexible dieting, counting macros, things of that nature. But when I was competing contest prep, I wanted to control as many variables as possible. because even for me, white potato versus sweet potato made a difference. So being able to know that and control as many things as you can in a such a delicate stage as that, I think, I mean, everyone's different, but in my experience, that has been the most stress-free way of doing things, even if you are a flexible dieter going into a contest prep.
Yeah, absolutely. And that just goes into like how everybody's different, you know. I personally have never really been able to sustain flexible dieting myself, you know, and that's where I think there's a lot of gray area because I see a lot of coaches saying that like flexible dieting is the most sustainable approach. And then there's people over here that saying you have to be on a meal plan. It's like there's a whole lot of gray area here. And I'm
Oh yeah.
in that gray area and I accept the fact that different different ways can work for different people. Like I said, flexible dieting has never really worked for me. I can't really sustain it because like at some point I'm just like, screw it. I'm just not going to track this. I'm not going to track that. And then just like before you know it, I'm off the diet again, you know? So I like to have
Yeah.
a lot of structure, but I need to create it for myself. So I create the structure. So a lot of times what flexible dieters will do anyway is basically create their own meal plan. And then they're eating the same thing every day anyway. So you know, it really depends on the person. And some people just want to be able to wake up and be like, what am I going to eat today? Let me figure it out like as I go. That's like stressful for me. I need to just like have it on paper. It's just like this is what I eat at this time of the day. You know what I mean? Kind of militant a little bit. And then yeah, so it really depends on the person, man. But during a
Yeah.
contest, you know, we want to be able to control for those variables. And a big piece that I always talk about too that you know flexible dieters sometimes don't think about is just like peri-workout nutrition and like optimizing training performance because that may not impact you in the short term, but like long term, that can kind of compound on itself, right? So like if we're not necessarily optimizing nutrition around the training window and optimizing your performance in the gym, especially if you're training at a high level and like you're training to true failure and like your execution is flawless on that, like you're really wanting to milk out like that like 1/8 of a rep that you missed could have compounded over a long period of time, right? So that's when things can become a little bit more important. So like, you know, intra-workout nutrition, pre-workout nutrition, post-workout nutrition can become a little bit more paramount in that sense too.
No, for sure. I'm making a note of that because that can be a whole episode in itself of optimization of your training and peri-workout. So I'm going to table that discussion for another time because that'll take us a whole another hour.
Sounds good to me.
Um, but I do want to make sure I touch on this part of your journey. You just recently were at the Olympia, and this time you were there as a coach. I want to know, like, how was that experience for you being there on the biggest stage as a coach?
Um, it was very intense to say the least. Like it was a lot of pressure and a lot of stress, but in a good way. Like I touched on earlier, those are all things that I enjoy about what I do. Um, it's positive pressure and positive stress, and it was a good time. It was actually my first time in Vegas, my first time at the Olympia, and my first time at the Olympia as a coach. So it was a lot to take in. It was definitely a great experience. I was in terms of like the actual coaching execution portion of things. I was very happy with how things played out. I don't think that we could have brought a better package with the things that we knew going into it and all the different pieces. So I was very happy with the outcome. And I'm excited to have gathered a lot of information to be able to improve for the next year. I'm definitely confident at this point that we will be back at the Olympia and we will be working our way up in the ranks. So I'm very excited about that.
I mean, it's honestly amazing just seeing the growth that you've had. And for those of you that don't know, Sean was at the Olympia as a coach with bikini competitor Jordan Fisher. And this is only her second year of competing, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, so she's definitely a very gifted athlete, very talented. I started personal training her. She kind of reached out to me, and I started training her in person. And I realized pretty quickly that she was very like attentive to detail, adherence, and was always there on time. And I also realized that she had incredible muscularity on her frame just naturally, right? Like incredible genetics, great shape, And basically I started to like plant that seed. I was like, hey, maybe you should compete, because I was like kind of launching SAGA, and I was really focused on becoming a contest prep coach at that point, and really focusing on having a lot of success in that regard. So I was like, you should compete, and I kept nudging her, and finally she made the decision, and she was all in. And ever since then, it's just been a whirlwind. So she won her first show. Her class was very close to taking the overall there. Took her overall at Texas State shortly after that. And then we went to nationals, earned her pro card. She got first place in her class at nationals out of like 30 something girls, I believe.
Wow.
And then immediately after that, we took a little bit of an improvement phase, and then we went into the Dallas Pro. She won her pro debut there and earned her Olympia qualification. We then went on to do the Chicago Pro. We ran into some functional health type issues that we've touched on during this podcast. We ran into some digestional issues. She had kind of like a histamine reaction. It was all a lot of bad things. So it didn't play out as well for us in Chicago. We took some time off, went to the Olympia, and that's where we're at now. And now we kind of have a game plan set for this coming year, and we're ready to execute. So, but yeah, this is her second year competing.
Wow. And something that's I think, and it still blows me away, that's truly amazing, is that you had an athlete there on the Olympia stage, and in the short amount of time have accomplished so much, and she's still natural.
Yeah, she's 100% natural. We haven't used a single PED with her. She's never used a single PED in her life. We haven't even used any like Yohimbine, Expel, anything along those lines. It's been pretty just straightforward dieting. Her body kind of enjoys being lean. It makes my job kind of easy, but also exciting. And her body just doesn't seem to really accumulate much negative adaptation. It's like that kind of resiliency piece that we touched on. So she's kind of built for this sport in some regard, and she's been able to sustain this over periods of time without using enhancements. And I don't want to give a unrealistic message that everybody's going to be capable of doing that, because that's definitely not the case.
Right.
A lot of the times, especially being able to compete at that frequency and this often as she has, the body's going to not be happy with you, and you're going to have a lot of down regulations, and you're going to have negative adaptations. This is going to be the case for a lot of people. So a lot of times those enhancements can help mitigate that, to be honest. Like even if we're doing things like hormone replacement therapy and things along those lines, even with female competitors. So I don't want to create unrealistic expectations for people thinking that anybody can kind of go and do that, unfortunately. But we have managed to do that with her, so it's been fun.
Yeah, it's truly amazing, and I think it's no stretch of the imagination to say that you were within maybe there on the Olympia stage. There's maybe 1% that is truly natural.
Yeah, I
So
would say that if there is a large amount of competitors that are natural at the Olympia level, I wouldn't even say large, but if there is any population of natural athletes at the Olympia stage, it's definitely in the bikini division. The
okay.
level of conditioning just isn't quite as extreme, and there's a lot of things. I think that there's multiple girls that I know of that are natural on the bikini stage, but I would say that probably the majority of them are on enhancements or have used enhancements at some point in their career.
Right, and just what you've been doing is amazing, and going back onto the broader picture of coaching at the Olympia, what what did you learn from that experience that you're going to be able to take not just to Jordan but to all of your athletes?
Um, you know, I think a lot of it was just personal development, to be honest. A lot of it was just the pressure of being there, being exposed to the stress. It's just like anything, like in bodybuilding, for example, we're exposing ourselves to novel stressors of training and nutrition and all these things that our body hasn't necessarily experienced before, and we adapt to that in a positive way, right? So I think for me, a lot of it was just personal development. It was the experience of it. It was being able to handle the pressure of it, the stress, and going through that experience and coming out the other side a stronger person, a stronger coach with new perspectives, and eyes wider, I guess you could say. I think that that's where it really benefited me in terms of like actually executing as a coach. Um, there's things that we could have done better in terms of peaking and stuff like that. There's always little details that we could have done better, and we
Of course.
analyze those and move on to the next thing and try to execute better. It's just like any sport, right? If you play football, you're going to go back and watch footage and what could we have done better, and how are we going to execute next time, right? So, just like that.
I love it. I love it. Um, and then if you have a little bit more time, I have one more talking point I want to hit on because I actually did have a close friend of mine reach out to me, knew I was doing this interview, and had a specific question for you.
Wow,
And it's really kind of centered around kind of, I guess, peak week. And what what do you, in a broad world, because of course it's very independent on clients, but in a broad world, you're trying to bring a dry look. How do you go about that peak week and the ultimate, like, being dry on stage so that you can make sure that you see all the lines and everything?
so the most important piece of that is just being lean enough. Um, there's a saying I've heard. It's like you can't peak fat, and it's very true. So the leaner you are, the more peeled you are, the less you're going to have to worry about any level of fluid retention. Now, I'd say another big piece of that is actually the stress piece. So, if you're not somebody if you're somebody that's not very good at managing your stress, you're very neurotic. You're stressed out going into peak week. You're stressed out the night before a show. You're not getting much sleep. All these things can definitely cause you to hold water and fluid. That's definitely a very important piece. So being able to manage your stress well is going to be huge for that. If you're stressed the hell out and you've only gotten 3 hours of sleep the night before the show, I guarantee you're going to look different than you would have if you would have just gotten 8 hours of sleep. I promise. So that's a very big piece to that. Um, Other than that, there's a lot of nuances that we could go into in terms of what causes somebody to hold fluid, spilling over in terms of the carb load, a lot of
Mhm.
these different pieces. But I can guarantee that when it comes to like water, that's probably like one of the least of your concerns in terms of coming in looking dry. Um, I've also heard the term that a hydrated physique is a striated physique. So, if you're dehydrated, you're probably going to be flat. But we also want to ride a balance there because, too much water can affect your look as well. So there's a lot of different pieces, and it's going to be very dependent on the individual. But the less you can have to make like a Hail Mary when it comes to water and sodium, the better, I would say.
Love it. And we've had you and I have actually had this conversation before, but I want to bring it back up as far as, like, you've touched on two pieces of it with the water retention and the carb loading, if you will. You take a non-traditional approach, I would say, in the bodybuilding world, and with your approach to carb loading versus front loading versus back loading and water depletion. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, there's kind of three general ways that we can carb load. Um, that would be kind of a front load, and then kind of more of a linear load where we're just kind of loading through the whole week, or you can do kind of a back load, or like a rapid back load where like it's all kind of at once in one day sort of situation. It really depends on an athlete. If it's somebody that I've been running a lot of test peaks with, and it's pretty predictable, the environment's predictable, and I know that they're not going to be all that stressed out. We'll usually do a back, I would say that most of the time I'm going to do a backload or a rapid backload with an athlete. With Jordan for the Olympia, we did more of kind of like a linear loading where her food was pretty constant through the week. And we actually started that on Wednesday. So it was Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Her carbs were consistent through the whole thing, basically. Carbs and fats were consistent all the way through. I think we backed off on food just a tiny bit, like the last meal on the Friday before the show. And she was just popping at the seams. She was very full. With bikini, you can afford to spill over a little bit. She was very, very lean, so she had like striated glutes a little. She had some striations in her glutes and stuff. So we kind of wanted to like blur those lines a little bit.
Mhm.
So it really depends on the division and the look that you're going for. But that's why I like coaching bodybuilding specifically because it's just like you want to be as hard, lean, full, dry, all the things as possible. Like you're really trying to tilt the needle in the most extreme direction. So um, that's where I have a lot of fun because it's like the other thing with like bodybuilding, for example, is that a lot of athletes don't need nearly as many carbs as they think they do to fill
Right.
out, especially if you want to be really conditioned, because a conditioned athlete is gonna like you can fullness is not. I mean, if you have size and you have the shape and you have all these things, like if you fill out enough and you're able to hold that conditioning, like your conditioning is gonna be far more impressive than that guy that's a little bit fuller than you and lost some of his lines. So that's definitely it really depends on the division, man. So, but that's where a lot of those nuances come in, and that's where like coaching comes in, where it's like a lot of these things are played. I tell athletes too, like going into a peak, it's like, hey, I can kind of like lay out a map for us, like where we're going to go. But a lot of this is play by ear. Like they're sending me pictures after meals, they're posing after meals, like getting blood moving around a little bit, and kind of like I'm taking a look at them. It's kind of like play by play sort of situation. That's when a lot of the fun happens because, like I said, it's a lot of pressure and stress that's fun to me. So.
Yeah, for just for sure. And that's a whole nother conversation that we can have on another episode of just the different looks that you bring depending on the division and, and the athlete and all of those things. So that would be another fun conversation that we can have further down the line. Um, but Sean, I also want to give you some time here at the end to t- tell the people how they can learn more about you, how they can learn more about Saga, and ultimately, if they're interested in hiring a coach, how can they get in touch with you?
So I'm primarily active on Instagram. My personal Instagram is Sean Irwin underscore. And then we also have the Saga page where we're posting a lot of educational content, a lot of good stuff in terms of training execution, nutritional nuances, all that kind of stuff. That's going to be at Saga Coaching. And then if you want to reach me at my email, I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have, lead you in the right directions. I love providing any sort of free value that I can, or just anything that I can do to help anybody. So that's gonna be Sean at sagacoaching.com. And then for coaching inquiries, also you can go to sagacoaching.com and reach out to us through there. There are two other coaches that work with me at Saga, and they're great for lifestyle specifically. And they're very skilled, educated coaches. So, take a look at it, the coaches we have available over there, and see if anything might spark your interest. We're always happy to chat it up and answer any questions that you may have. So, just give us a shout, and we'll get the ball rolling.
And I will have those all of those linked into the description. If you're watching on YouTube, I'll have those pop up underneath Sean. You're probably seeing them now. But Sean, I want to really thank you. Yes, I really want to thank you for your time and setting aside your very busy schedule to meet to talk with me about all of these things.
Yeah, absolutely, man. It's been a pleasure. I'm happy to answer any questions you have, and always happy to support anything you got going on. So it's been a good time.
It's been a great time. And anyone that has questions that they want to ask Sean, and we'll definitely have him back on the podcast, and we'll get those questions answered for you. Reach out to him directly, or and if we really find that the question is going to need some time, we will schedule another podcast for him to dive deep into it. But Sean, again, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for taking the time for this.
Absolutely, man. I appreciate you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for listening to the very first episode of the Helpful Huddle podcast. If you enjoyed this video, give us a like, give us a follow on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok. You can find us using the handle at helpful_huddle. The YouTube channel is at Helpful Huddle Podcast. And we are also now on Spotify at the Helpful Huddle Podcast. Make sure you give us a follow and drop your questions on any of our platforms to let me know if you have any questions that you want me to find answers for. I'm here to help. Thank you guys.